Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Outsmart Overeating podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Hooper, and alongside me is Coach Steph Miramontes. Today, we're going to be talking about a popular phrase often thrown around in the weight loss and diet industry. Chances are you've probably said it a couple 100,000 times to yourself, too. And that is the problem with getting back on track. Now, when I hear that phrase, that suggests to me that somebody is generally an all or nothing thinker and approaching their weight loss program through the lens of perfection. What comes to your mind when you hear that phrase, Steph?
Same. It's definitely a perfectionistic type of narrative. I mean, I really don't hate the words back on track when used it loosely. I think we use that kind of language for certain things like, oh, I just got to get my house back in order. I need to get this back on track, the schedule back on track when the kids go back to school, like that kind of thing. But there's only this heavy drama associated with it when it comes to people's food. And it really just means I'm going to buckle down. I'm going to do all the things. I'm going to do it perfectly. I'm going to wake up tomorrow a whole ass new person, and it's going to be amazing. Watch. Here we go.
Yeah. One thing that I often try to remind clients of frequently throughout the Unstuffed program is that their biggest challenge in the process and trying to undrop that unwanted body fat is really not about the food. Their biggest barrier is their minds, and more specifically, the stories you tell yourself. And words matter, right? So if you are someone who is telling yourself, oh, I've been waiting for hunger before all of my meals for a month now, I should be seeing results by now. Or I've exercised every day for the past 2 weeks and the scale hasn't budged. I must be doing something wrong. Next week, I'm going to, run an extra 10 miles. Right. And my personal favorite is the back on track language. Last night, I went out to eat dinner with some friends and I ate way too much. This morning, I woke up feeling bloated, gross. Tomorrow, I'm going to get back on track. Right. So back on track is that phrase. And I do think that I have heard that more with dieters using that language than really any other area of my life. Actually, I can't really even recall a time somebody has said getting back on track in reference to anything other than dieting. And it's such a casual phrase, and our clients often feel like they have to apologize for saying it on the coaching calls. But I'm with you. I think the reasons for why we say it matter more than the phrase itself, right? And so when the client says that they fell off track, what comes to your mind, Steph? Like, what specifically did you use that language? I guess might be a starting point with your own dieting history. And what did it mean when you were saying that specifically?
Well, specifically for me, back on track literally meant all hell broke loose for a time, and we were about to get back on track. We were about to do all the things again so that we could get to a place where we got to feel good about ourselves again. We were going to do all the things. Finally, motivation was back. So for me, it was in these big containers of time where I think a lot of dieters have these micro moments where they are constantly getting back on track on Monday, getting back on track after, like you said, a big dinner out or something like that. And this back on track narrative actually creates the big dinners out. It's like, be perfect, be perfect, be perfect. And then you go out and you don't even know how to handle or navigate a meal that isn't structured, that isn't calorie counted or macro counted or quote unquote on your plan or whatever. So you have bought into this narrative that anything that you eat at that point that you can't track, you can't weigh, you can't measure, you can't quantify in some diety way is off track. And therefore you've blown it. And when you blow it, that costs you guilt, that costs you shame, that costs you disappointment, that costs you failure. And when you pay that price, you go all in, might as well, right? So then you have to feel so shitty that you get back on track.
Right. I was speaking with a client this morning about the desire to go on or off track in the first place. And usually the off track in this scenario that I described, going to the restaurant, dining with friends, why do we fall off the proverbial track in the first place is often rooted in a desire to receive relief, which is your first clue that your diet, your weight loss strategy or plan is not going to be something that is sustainable long term. So even needing to go off track or feeling like there is a track in the first place signals to me that perhaps what we're doing isn't something that's going to be able to be something you can maintain for the rest of your life. And that was my objective when creating the Unstuff program is what can people do to lose weight and keep it off forever? I'm not interested in educating people on how to lose weight for that wedding or the vacation, right? We really wanted to get to the underlying reasons of why people can't stick to the plan in the first place. And I think that the language of getting back on track tends to be coming from a judgmental, critical voice, anchored in not good enough. And so that fuels the guilt that you just described, right? The disappointment, the self-loathing. And then here we have to build up the willpower gene and take big ass action again to compensate for maybe the overeat, or at least that was more my cycle. You described the micro getting back on track moments where yours tended to be a little bit larger in some instances, although I imagine you probably had some smaller ones throughout as well. But that just goes to show how similar yet different you and I are in our dieting ways, but yet still using the same language, still shitting all over ourselves, not good enough, right? And so I guess my question for you is, if being on track is a quote unquote good thing and being off track obviously must be a bad thing, then it really is just another case of perfectionism at play. And that thought becomes a habit. Striving for perfectionism towards your goal also becomes a habit. We believe that we have to be perfect in order to succeed. So one of the first things that we do, Steph, and this is what I want your perspective on, is how do we help our clients loosen the grip on needing to be perfect in order to achieve their goal?
Well, the reality is that you don't need to be perfect to achieve your goal. There is so much evidence to the contrary. And we really highlight that the more you tighten the grip on that perfection, the more the slingshot effect is going to happen. You just tighten it, and boy, oh boy, does it sling the other way. And it's proven every time a client goes nuts on something like trigger foods, which is one of the ways that we help clients navigate this sort of perfectionistic thinking around clean eating and only whole foods and all of this stuff where certain foods are good for the diet, certain foods are bad for the diet, certain foods are weight loss foods, certain foods are fat gain foods. And we really just knock all of that down to the ground and say, hey, all foods are weight loss foods or fat gain foods, depending on how you eat them. And so if you're going to eat them all day long, I don't give a shit if it's green beans. Eventually, you are going to gain some weight on some clean food. Ask me how I know. Been there, done that, wrote the book, co-signed, I am sure by you. You wrote the foreword. It's like, let me just tell you how you do that. So, and the same goes for people who have done the cookie diet and the Twinkie diet and, all that bullshit. You can lose weight on processed foods. And so we really just bring a more harmonious and balanced approach to these kinds of things, and not in the way of like, you get a cheat meal or you get a treat food here and there. We really do a good job of integrating these foods on a regular basis in a way that makes you feel like you are being respectful to your body, in a way that feels kind, in a way that doesn't make you feel like shit at the end of it. And so that you don't feel like you are so deprived, so restricted that you lose your shit as soon as you smell a chocolate bar when someone walks by you in the office.
Right. I mean, listen, I think anyone who's been paying attention to the podcast, my weekly email newsletter, Instagram, recognizes that I bounced up and down the scale, agonizing about my weight for years, but also agonizing about being a failure. And there was a constant stream of feeling like, again, not good enoughness, thunder thighs, big arms, restricting my food a million different ways. And to your point, low carb, high carb, low sugar, no sugar, Right. But every single time I fell off track, and that really for me meant more along the lines of binging. And then I would go back to agonizing about how big of a failure I was. I never really felt like I could do anything consistently long enough to see the desired outcome. And obviously, what we pay attention to grows. So I became an expert at agonizing about how big of a failure I was. And so rather than getting curious about changing the behavior or what's really going on here, there was no patience, there was no kindness, there was no compassion, no real, like I said, curiosity. Then I was really struggling to stay on that proverbial track as well. And that abusive language obviously meant that there was anything that I was good at, it probably was beating myself up and being inconsistent with the extremes. That created the environment for frustration and ultimately weight gain. So in order to become the kind of person who's consistent, Steph, you just kind of outlined some of the steps that we take or we help our clients in finding a more balanced approach. But I know for some of our listeners, they're going to be like, well, go hard, go home. That feels like quitting. It's not good enough. But also, how's your current plan working for you?
I'm like, are you camping out on your couch yet? Because you have gone home. You have gone hard and then you have just gone right home, like every time. And I think we see two kinds of people, and there are some intersections here, but like you get off track and then you treat yourself like you're a failure. Then we have this other camp of folks, probably more permissive folks, that they get off track and they just think that something is wrong with, like, that diet didn't work. They start collecting evidence that nothing works. Something is wrong with their body. Something is wrong with their genetics. Something is wrong with, all of these things. And I think, like I said, there's some intersections there. It's like, I'm a failure, but dieting is a failure too, and nothing is ever going to work for me. And, so they start this sort of self-defeating process where even if they do, quote unquote, get back on track, whatever the track is that they choose of that week, they're diet hopping and bouncing from strategy to strategy. Even if they do get back on track, it's usually this half-hearted effort at some point because they've collected so much evidence that nothing works that they're not believing in themselves anymore. And that's really the sinister part about all of this, is it chips away at your self-esteem, it chips away at your self-belief and your confidence in your ability to do something. And so then we swoop in and say, hey, I got a reasonable plan for you. And they're like, bitch, please, I tried everything. There's no way just, having a candy bar breakfast or whatever I want is going to work. And it blows people's minds because it does work. But we do see this back on track mentality in the beginning of the program really seep in as people try to diet their way through this process. And we have to pick it apart, unravel it, throw out the trash, do a bunch of new things. And it's a fascinating process. We've all been there, but there is a better way. We got to burn the track down. And that way you are, instead of doing the whole back on track, all or nothing perfectionistic mindset, you save yourself so much grief by making your next best decision. You don't have to wait till tomorrow. You don't have to wait till Monday. You don't have to wait for 3 months once you've regained all your weight like I did, and then be like, okay, now I'm finally self-loathing enough that I'm willing to do all the things because I went so hard that I went straight home. And it's a more accurate and authentic way to have a healthy relationship with food. It's how you actually want to live your life. Nobody wants to never have good food, enjoyable food, things like that. And why do you want that to throw you, quote unquote, off track? Why not just make your next best decision?
Well, yeah. I mean, you think about naturally thin people, they don't have this language, right? And they still overeat on occasion, but they're not ever saying, well, tomorrow I'll get back on track. And yet they remain effortlessly lean because a lot of the dieting, yo-yoing is rooted in that inner talk, right? Feeling guilty and feeling like we broke one of our rules. So ultimately, if I can't be perfect, today is a wash. I'm going to eat all the things to compensate. And then tomorrow I'm going to get back on track, right? But listen, I will say, when you stop focusing on dead end diets and begin investing your energy in becoming a better version of yourself, someone who doesn't agonize over food and punishing exercise, then the track does start to fade away. And I think focusing on expanding our definition of what a relationship with food actually is, because it starts with yourself first and foremost. And if we're going to just be a dick to ourselves all the time, then we eat like somebody who doesn't have self-respect, and we treat our bodies like a trash can. And so when we work on that relationship and expand it beyond just what's in the fridge and pantry or on the food scales, then we really do have a plan or a system or a process that feels a lot more loving and kind and gentle and respectful, and all the things that I know people who are listening to are probably cringing when they hear right now. They're like, just give me the plan. But also that is what creates success. And don't take it from me. Go and check out all the client testimonials that have been posted over the years. You know, there is resistance initially up front with this concept or idea of being compassionate or being gentle and learning what that actually looks like in a relationship of food. But it is sustainable, and it does actually get to more the core of your identity and who you are that feels good and in alignment, and learning to eat in a way that doesn't feel forced, but actually feels good, which humans don't like to do things that are uncomfortable for long term, y'all. So it's a waste of time to even do the extreme bullshit that you can't stick to. You're going to quit. Literally, if there is an off track or an on track, then again, there's probably a chance that your track is fucked long term.
It really is like being in a go-kart when you are in this perfectionistic mindset. You like go, go, go and hit, go, go, go and just hit a wall, go, 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 and then just hit a wall over and over and over. You don't get anywhere. It's less fun, but you don't get anywhere. You just constantly get whiplash from these back and forth behaviors. It's not helpful at all. And compassion takes your foot off the brakes and it helps you coast through. It is the thing that helps you say, I understand why I would have made that choice. I understand why I did what I did. It's very human of me to make some of these decisions. This doesn't bear any weight at all on the future of my weight loss, the future of my success, or on my relationship with food. I just want to understand it. Now I can say, like, what do I want to do about it? What do I want to do next? What would I do if I was faced with this obstacle again? Because just newsflash, you will be. Humans are predictable. We do the same shit over and over. So what would I do differently? Let me create a plan. Let me create a strategy to talk to myself differently, to help myself through. That's what compassion does. It doesn't say, I don't care, moving on. Of course you care. Of course you care. Compassion holds you accountable in a way that moves you forward. Criticism holds you accountable in a way that slams on the brakes. And I think that's really the difference. When you're in your head insulting yourself and feeling like a failure, you'll just keep making the same choices over and over again because you're not willing to look at them and examine them. It hurts too much. It's too painful. It becomes who you are.
Yeah. The other thing that I'll mention here is habits, and how we can't create a habit unless we're consistent. And in order to be consistent, you can't constantly be getting on and off track. So I know we think moving quickly by doing extreme things, by increasing the intensity, is going to get us to our goal quicker, but it actually does the opposite, right? As the old fable goes, the tortoise beats the hare every time, because when you slow down, you can actually troubleshoot and see what problems you're solving for and make sure that you're solving for the correct problems. And creating that consistency is ultimately what creates the habit. But you can't create a habit if we're just stop, go, stop, go, stop, go. And so there is a lot of value in slowing down and being consistent and trying to be, I guess, a learner, a student, as opposed to strong arming, forcing, and then beating ourselves up when we can't follow through. Steph, any other thoughts as it relates to how does one actually kind of begin to let go of the perfectionism? I know so much of that is rooted in a need and a desire for being in control, because there's safety and security in being perfect, but there's also consequences to perfectionism, as we've just discussed. So any parting thoughts on maybe what to implement first step ideas?
I really think it's examining your most common get off track behaviors and just seeing, why am I off track so often? When I get off track, why is that? Well, because I haven't been allowing myself the foods that I enjoy. Well, because everyone around me tempts me with bad food, or it's because I go out drinking and then all bets are off, right? Just start looking at what are my most common self-sabotage like behaviors and see if we can fix things at the root of the problem. Because if you are falling victim to a bag of chips and, chocolates and things like that, I bet if you implemented them regularly, you wouldn't fall victim to them anymore. The weekend wouldn't come around and you wouldn't lose yourself head first into a Costco-sized bag of Doritos because you had some at lunch yesterday. It wasn't that big a deal. But until you start building some self-trust and putting some boundaries around that, you're really going to have a hard time. So we can't fix a problem we can't see. You got to start looking. What are my most common issues? I promise you, it is not that food is the problem. It is the way that we're thinking about food as a problem that is causing this. And this is really hard to teach on a podcast. It's really, really hard because that's what we do in our programs. We talk to people about their individual issues. And of course, it doesn't matter what the issue is. It applies to everyone in a general sense. But you kind of have to break these things down and see them in yourself. And because everyone's belief is so strong, because we've been programmed so well by the diet industry that you have to be perfect, that it's hard to buy into this until you start having that conversation and saying, like, how is this actually hurting me? Until you can see how it's hurting you to be perfect, instead of thinking that something is lesser about you because you can't be, you're never going to solve this.
Yeah, it's a great point. I will say, when you lose the track and just focus on being consistent, this is where I do think having a framework, a plan is helpful. Strategy, steps, a process that has already been proven to be successful, hence the Unstuffed program, right? Because otherwise most people are just going to wing it. Or they're like, yeah, I tried hunger-directed eating and all I did was gain a bunch of weight because my brain is always hungry, or I'm always hungry, right? And these are the kind of things that I think allow us to quit quickly and give up on ourselves quickly, is because if we can't be perfect at it right out the gate, then it's not worth pursuing. It's not, we can't be consistent, then we're not going to get the result. But what you have to understand is change takes time and a lot of repetition. And this is generally why people end up quitting prematurely. But also, if you've been trying to get on track for like 20 years now, maybe it's time for a new track, more importantly. And are we even having that conversation? I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Steph, is we're creatures of habit. We have the same thoughts over and over and over again, hence the same outcomes in our lives over and over and over again. And until we start to look at those individual thoughts and circumstances and question them, which humans are not very good at doing with themselves in a self-reflective manner, it's really hard to see what's right in front of you. So having an objective point of view and getting some guidance from people who have already done this work with lots of other people, I think, is a really helpful tool. And frankly, why I love working with mentors. So perhaps consider you can take the extra long road doing it, trying to figure it out on your own, or you can potentially join a community like Unstuffed and allow us to guide you to your goal. Because again, the off track piece is coming from a thought habit. And until you break that habit, again, you're kind of screwed, right? So it's time to develop a new neurological pathway that allows you to be consistent. You're not going to magically wake up tomorrow morning a different person with all the willpower and grit in the world if you weren't able to do it today. There are skills that need to be learned between then and now. So our clients aren't special and lucky. Steph, love ya, but you're not special and lucky. I'm not special and lucky. The only difference is we remove the pressure to be perfect. and become a student and not have all the answers and try something different and new. And that is when the change came. That's when the consistency in our success arrived. And it's available to anybody if they're willing and have the courage to do something different. So that is it for us today. If you have found this episode helpful, then I hope you will join us on the next one, and we will catch you then. Have a great week, y'all.